Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. On behalf of the JCC Chicago Jewish Film Festival, I'm Eileen Ullman. I'm Director of Community Engagement at JCC Chicago and of the Film Festival. And we are just thrilled this evening to have the filmmaker on The Conductor, Bernadette Wittgenstein. She is like a superwoman. You are a linguist, a professor at Johns Hopkins University, a media theorist, a documentary filmmaker, and an author, and currently the president of the Northeastern Modern Languages Association. And on behalf of the Film Festival, I really want to welcome you. Welcome to Chicago virtually, just virtually.
Thank you so much, Eileen. I'm so excited. I love Chicago. I haven't been there in a while due to the pandemic, but I look forward to going back. And I'm there now, as you say, virtually.
That's been one of the most wonderful things about COVID, actually. You have to look for the silver linings. And that's been the silver lining, that it has made the world smaller and brought us together in ways that we never would have been able to meet the people behind the films in the way that, meeting on Zoom has allowed us to do.
Very true.
So let's talk about your film, which was just wonderful, like a musical gift, and such a great story, So, tell me, like, what was it about Marian Alsop that inspired you to make the film, or how did this come to be?
Yes, so as you mentioned, I'm working at Johns Hopkins University here in Baltimore, which is why I moved here. And Marian Alsop is not only was the chief conductor of the BSO. Now she left the BSO, however, she's still present and conducts with them, I think, at least once. At least a month a year or so. However, she's also conducting at the Peabody Conservatory, which belongs to Johns Hopkins. So technically we are colleagues. And I'm, on a different campus, but what happened is when I moved to Baltimore, I went to the BSO because people told me, they knew I'm from Vienna, and they said, oh, you should listen to, this orchestra here. It's really good. And they assumed I was from Vienna and I liked classical music. It's a little bit of a stereotype, but in my case, it actually, hit the truth. So I went to see her and I saw her play Brahms, I believe, and I was very, very moved by the music. And I was also very taken by the fact that she was a woman, and that I felt, why is it strange for me to see a woman conductor of that kind of stature? And so my film work and my media work has been in feminism and in media, always asking the question of, who is speaking? Why does this feel normal? Who spoke in the past? My work is such that I try to give voice to marginalized people who haven't been heard. And so in this case, I caught myself asking the question, why didn't I see women conductors, in a mainstream sort of way before? And that's when I reached out to her better. There was an event, we were both there, and I through Hopkins again, I asked her, and then she told me a story about the forgotten history of Sylvia Kadoof. And she makes like a very brief appearance in the film at the end during the credits. And it says that she was the assistant to Leonard Bernstein in the 60s, and they had to change the bylaws so that she was allowed to actually step onto the podium. Allowed. Mm-hmm. And so she told me that story, and she said, you should make a film about the forgotten history of women conductors and start with Sylvia Kadoof, because she said, I had never heard of her. And when I went to Lucerne to guest conduct, somebody told me, do you know Sylvia Kadoof? So I did research Sylvia Kadoof and other women. However, I really fell for Marian's story once I got to know her story, and I decided that the film needed to carry just her story also as a metaphor for many other stories, but that as a documentary, I wanted people to be just on this journey of her story. And it ended up, the working title was We Conduct, and it ended up with The Conductor. So
One conductor.
on Conductor, exactly.
So, I mean, you must have been working very closely with her. How long did it take you to do the documentary?
It took about 4.5 years from really the very first conversations. I would say 4 active years, of which about a year and a half active production, and then post-production. And then at the end of post-production, we decided to go back to the storyline that I always wanted to get, and she wasn't ready to share yet. But that sometimes happens in documentary. You just have to take your time. It's like any other relationship. And then that relationship, she started trusting me more and more. And, when she's, sometimes she is with me at these screenings, and she does say that, that she trusts me blindly, and she knew her story was in good hands. But the storyline about the BSO and the letter of contempt and that letter story, she did not want in the film until the very end, when she actually came to me and said, I think I'm ready.
So it's really about a relationship, because I was going to ask you, like, when you tell a story, because that's what you are, you're a storyteller, right?
Absolutely.
And so when you're planning a documentary, do you have like a storyboard? Do you work from a storyboard? Did you envision, like, the way that the story kind of bookends itself with Marin as a young girl and, the influence of Leonard Bernstein, but now the influence that she now has over students. So was that thought out? Was that like planned from the beginning, or do these things kind of emerge?
It's both. So if I was in my office right now, I would have behind me, you would see my index cards and the storyboard actually that I worked with. Right now I'm home because it's already, past 8 o'clock here on the East Coast. But I think my storyboard with any film I've ever made is really about the emotional story points and what moves me. And so I do write all this down in the face of observation. I shadowed one of her classes for a full semester, for instance, the masterclass for conducting. I wrote down everything about what I felt and saw. And then the following semester, when we filmed it, there were some other students there, because the other ones had already taken the class. Some of them were the same. And so I knew that I wanted to tell her art through the way that she gives back to the next generations what she hasn't received. I knew that there was a strong emotional friction between that, and that I could move an audience to, juxtapose it, almost parallel edit. Because if you remember the masterclass, right afterward comes the rejection letter of her own when she was 23, as they are now. And so I did see that very soon. For me, it's always about the emotion. I became a filmmaker in addition to being an academic, because academia wasn't emotional enough for me. It wasn't emotional and empathetic enough to just talk about things. I want people to feel what we're talking about. Even history, I think it's important for me anyway. I have this desire. So for me, when I knew she was rejected and that I wanted to tell the story of how this star conductor had to go through what she went through, in addition to being excluded because of her gender, by showing how other people can enjoy actually the luxury of being in her presence, where she's giving back. So that's sort of, I love the vicinity of the opposite emotions, and I think that creates something really new always. We were just talking about film is this, I think it's a medium that's very close to life itself. There's something that you find beautiful, but maybe in that beauty you already become sad because you feel maybe I'm going to lose this. So the complexity of the human emotion is something that in a film and in editing you can really replicate, and in storytelling, pacing. And so that's how we constructed the story, very, very consciously. So
tell me about, so you started out as a linguist, and you moved on to become a filmmaker. And I often think that filmmaking is also a language.
yeah.
What goes into the film and what is not in the film, and the way that you portray people, or not you personally, but like the way the filmmaker tells the story. I think that's a
Absolutely.
language, but I think music for sure is a language. And
Absolutely.
and the music in this film, I felt that it just it added so much to it. So let me ask you something. Did you work with a composer, with a musician, or how did, obviously you were working with Marin, but
Yeah.
Marin's very close to this, it's Marin's story.
Yeah.
But
So
how did you come upon that?
yeah, so it's a really great question. So I want to maybe share something that I don't share always, but since you're asking, my grandparents were musicians in Vienna during the Nazi era, and they were, I think, very talented. I mean, I only have very vague memories of my grandfather. But he was an opera singer and my grandmother was a pianist, and they weren't able to be successful during the Nazi era. In fact, my grandfather had to hide, and so I grew up with this knowledge that classical music was something very precious that was in my family, and that some of my forefathers were hindered at becoming good at. And so I think I have a very special opinion and approach to music from that. Now, I only studied the piano like any other Viennese child, it's nothing special, but at least, for 12 years. And my mother was very musical. And so certainly I think there's music in my family. Secondly, I always wanted to study music, and just it never really worked out. My children, on the other hand, I made them study each an instrument and music theory, everything, that I wasn't able to do. But throughout making the film, I actually worked with a PhD student at the Peabody, and she tutored me through all the scores that I chose, that I wanted to include in the film, so that I understood them. And Eileen, I tell you, I was working hard, because I said, okay, let's start with Mahler. I want to use the first symphony. And that was simply because I love Mahler. Mahler was also an outsider like Marin. And so was Bernstein. So I think, some of the music was chosen also to really accompany her life story. And then I said, I want to understand the four movements in this symphony. How are they constructed? Why is this motif coming back here, and how? And we took it apart, and I used it in the film's dramaturgy, because Mahler is a genius. And if if you understand how the music is constructed, you can make use of that if you really understand how. But this is not the end of the story. The best part of it is that my editor, Stefan, in Vienna, is a classically trained violinist. So the combination of all of these different skills, we didn't need a composer. We just did it ourselves. But I tell you, that is really what I'm most proud of, because it's very difficult what we did. We had to cut many of the musical phrases down, because we didn't have time for a 45-minute symphony. And so sometimes we also brought certain motifs back. Like, for instance, the opening of Mahler's First is at the beginning of the film, and smack in the middle of the film, we bring it back. So we did all sorts of tricks.
I'm going to go back and watch the film. You know, I almost want to go back and just listen, not watch, but just listen.
I would love that. And by the way, we are also coming out with, we sold the film. So we have the great news that it will be on PBS Great Performances as of March. And we have a theatrical release also in January in New York and LA. So right now we're just finishing all the world, music rights and all that. And we want to have a soundtrack for people to download from our website so that they can have the music, because I think and Maren loves it. Every time we used a new music for a certain scene, she was always very moved. She helped only to refine certain things in the very end when we had sound mixing and sound design. She was, we gave her that opportunity to listen to it, and she did tell Stefan one or two things where she thought it could improve, and but that was it. She approved of the musical choices, and then they came sometimes, because you asked, do you plan everything? I think documentary as life itself, sometimes you're just lucky, and that year she was doing a lot of Mahler, and that was perfect. And then she said, oh, I'm going to Sao Paulo, and I'm a linguist, so I speak all the Romance languages. And she said, do you want to come and film there? And I said, what are you doing? And she says, Mozart. I said, I'm there. I mean, that was the perfect combination. So I also chose some of the music, just with my gut. And the Magic Flute was the first opera I ever went to in Vienna growing up, and I was 5, and I remembered the story all my life that I went to the opera house with my mother and my siblings, and the people there in Vienna, very strict. They said, well, children are only allowed as of 6. How old is your daughter? And my mother said, she is 6. And I thought, yes. So,
and at 5, you love that.
You love that. I know, I felt so mature. So anyway, the Magic Flute came in this way, and then, oh my God, so much other music. Brahms we used because it was the love of her musical life. She said when she was a teenager, she fell for Brahms. And so we use Brahms in those scenes when she thinks back at her family, and when she goes to the graveyard and remembers her mom at the end, it's also Brahms, because Brahms, we wanted to be closest to her heart. And we didn't tell the viewer that Brahms is what she fell for as a teenager, because we thought it's better not to know and to just feel it. So I think it just worked out that way.
I know that you formed a friendship with Maren, but I wondered, so when you do a film and you're about somebody's life, how much creative, how much creative or artistic choice did you have in the final cut of the film? And how much do you go back to that person and let them have a voice?
So I like to have, creative freedom, because I think it's a very difficult thing to make a film about someone else when that person tells you how to do it, because then you could be a propaganda filmmaker very easily.
That's true.
It could happen. So I do give the people who are in my films, however, the right to see themselves the way I see them. And if there's something that they really find too intimate or too something, I do hear them, but I would never do anything that they tell me to do. So my artistic choices, like the reenactment with the little girl, all of these are completely my choices. In fact, Maren didn't even know I was doing that. She in Vienna at some point, she said, what are all these children here in the audience? I said, yeah, these are just some children that are listening to you. Is that okay? So I never even told her what it is. And then when she saw the film, the rough cut, she had a little bit of a problem, because a rough cut is hard for somebody who's not a filmmaker to really understand.
Mhm.
You are a film professional, and so is your team here. I'm sure they understand how to watch rough cuts, but most people don't, you know. And so I told her, I understand, but it is a rough cut, so let's watch the fine cut then as a next one. And then there were a few things that I took out, but it was mainly sounds, you know, because we had her wired, so you could really hear very intimately her breathing. And I convinced her that we needed to hear her at some times, because that is what is so interesting, because the breathing of the conductor or any musician is always in pace, of course, in rhythm with what they're playing. And so if you you know, we just finished our DCP, so you don't have that sound surround, the 6-channel version. But if you listen to it in a cinema, which we just did in Denver at the festival, then you will hear a lot more. And sometimes it was too personal, and she said, take that out. And I said, I get that, and I respect that. So these were really the only things where, and you know, she said to me, Tomio Taki, one of her, you know, one of the people on her way to really help her realize her dream, he said in his speech, you know, for him, it didn't matter whether she was white or black or Oriental, as he says. And then Maren did say, I don't know that we should have him say that because it's an offensive word. And I said, yeah, but not to him. He's an old man. He's a very good man. He doesn't mean anything. And we can't interrupt his speech, because then I would feel as a viewer, oh my God, what could he have said? So, but it took a while to convince her to leave that in. But I won all my battles, Eileen. So
You don't appear to be a tough, you know, lady, but you are a tough lady.
yes, I mean, it's not about tough so much, but I have a very strong will, and I know what's going to be beautiful. So I don't know. I just think Maren just trusted me, and it was, you know, it was the right choice. But I certainly respected her opinion, of course, and Kristen's, her wife. So we screened it for both of them. And you see, there was a moment when Kristen actually points, or Maren points to the poster with Bernstein. She says, oh, you know, this is where we met, Kristen and I, because Kristen was also at Tanglewood. And however, she points to something that isn't her or could be a little bit misread, because there's also a photo. And so Kristen, she said to me, do you really need to know where we met? Or can you take that out? And I took it out, because I said, to be honest, I don't think we need to know that. And it's fine. So, you know, I did do that with both of them, and listen to their reaction, seeing themselves in the film.
So did you, do you think, because somebody has asked the question about if she had any issues because of her lifestyle or whatever. So do you
Of
think
being
that's
gay?
why? Yes. Do you think that I mean, do you think that that's the case?
No, I don't think so. So it's a good question. And I asked that question too, of course. And she said she doesn't think that she was discriminated against because being gay, but because being a woman. However, she said, you know, at the time, you know, when they were young, it wasn't as common a topic to talk about, and so that people sometimes maybe wondered. But the reason this is not very developed, the storyline, and rather I'm telling it in a very normalized way. I wanted to tell the story of her being gay, just like any other story about anybody else and their sexuality, which in this film plays a very small role, if any.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought pointing to her being gay was lifting a story that wasn't really about this film. And I thought it would be offensive, actually. So because she says it doesn't really have much to do with her musical identity, it became not one of those carrying storylines, but I wanted it to be in there, and for people to just see a normal life between, you know, a gay couple, a lesbian couple. I also wanted it to steer away from the question of sexuality. That's why I had all her friends, from String Fever, their reunion, to see all the women and the camaraderie and the love they have for one another. I think that being gay is not something necessarily sexual. And so I didn't want the viewer to start thinking about their relationship. And
Right.
and that's not something that I think anybody should judge.
I thought, when I was watching the film, what struck me was that I felt like this truly was the story of the conductor. This is a young woman who she had a single purpose in her life. And it, so that the story wasn't so much about her relationship with her mother.
Yeah.
There's maybe a little more about with her father, but not so much about, her relationship with her parents, or really like the people that were peripheral to her purpose.
Absolutely.
And
and you
so
got it.
that's how
Absolutely.
I read it.
Yeah.
That's or read
That's
it.
exactly what we wanted.
The story. That's how I read it.
Exactly. And so that's why we return to the theme. And if you saw our index cards, we always have in every line, I want to be the conductor. That's what, we came back to that theme in one or another way. And Kristen says it for us too. She just wanted to be the conductor, right? Her wife says it. So I didn't want the wife to talk too much about their relationship rather than about what Maren wanted, because in a way that is her love letter to her, that she respects that and she wants it for her and for them. And exactly, so I really stripped away all of these other universes and made it about her life dream and the question why anybody has the right to deny somebody else a life dream. And that's really what the story is about. And sure, it's about being an outsider, but I didn't want to distract us with the question of a sexual orientation. I just think it should be normal. I think it should be everybody's right to have their own orientation and religion. Sometimes Jewish festivals have asked me, oh, and she puts a stone on the cemetery. Is she Jewish? And I said, no, she's not Jewish, but I let her put the stone there because that's what she did in a Jewish tradition. And she honors that tradition. And why can't I show her do that? And I don't need to explain if she's Jewish or not. So that's how I go about this. It's always about what the character wants. And she wanted to be a conductor, and you said it.
Well, you are a fabulous storyteller, just
Thank
fabulous. You. So tell me, what are you working on next?
Oh my God. So I'm working on a few things. One is a female composer who is in the Vienna scene in the Concerthaus. Her name is Lara Auerbach. And I'm fascinated with her work and with her story as a composer. And I got so interested in making this film about the question of what is composition? How does that work? And how does music come to be? And so I'm thinking about, and we are sort of in pre-production or pre-development discussions with Lara to make a story about composition. It's not so much a biography as it would be a film about musical composition.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it would be. And then the other completely crazy project that's sort of in me is a film. I was a Story Lab mentor this weekend for a big film fund here. And so everybody introduced themselves. And so I said, I don't know how to describe it, but it's like a Holocaust musical that I want to make. And the people, my mentors, they were, yes, what is that? we want to see your Holocaust musical. And so it came. This is a topic that came to me from someone whose ancestors wrote a comedy in the 1920s in Vienna. And he wanted somebody to read and understand the comedy. It was actually a very successful comedy, was played in all the big theaters in Austria. It was also made into a film with the main star called Hansi Niese, a very famous German film star from the 30s. And it's like a feminist piece avant la lettre. It takes place in a store, and there's this store owner, a really strong lady with extremely funny, vulgar language, the Viennese dialect, and she has 3 daughters. And the story is about the freedom of, her daughters, and that nobody should own them, no man. They should be financially independent. So it's a comedy. And this author took his life in 1938, just right after the Anschluss. And I thought I would like to show sort of this comedy, the making of this comedy as a film, and really ended when, at the high point of an Austria that could never really be. And, a progressive place where people are, feminist and queer, and they can actually imagine themselves in all sorts of roles. And then almost like The Sound of Music really ended right there, because there's nothing else to say. But as they're performing this play, they would be having the best time. So I'm thinking about that, and it's a big step for me, of course, because it would take me into musical, narrative, all sorts of hybrid art forms. But I certainly won't be making this film by myself. But I'm really hoping I could do it also, in the memory of my great grandparents at that point, who were actually killed by the Nazis. So my grandparents were the ones who weren't able to do their professions, but then the ones before died. So I do think that as an Austrian living in America, something, takes me back to Vienna all the time in my film work and wants to fiddle around. I'm not sure, do things. So those two projects, I think right now are on my mind, and there are a few others.
Well, please keep in contact with us and let us know as you're finishing, because both of them sound wonderful. I mean, the one about the comedy, when I think about comedy, I think how closely connected comedy and tragedy are.
Absolutely.
They're just a step away from one another, and so
exactly.
Sounds fascinating.
And that's exactly what I'm trying to, I'm going to try to really push it. And and it would be also honoring that person's life story. He was a lawyer who wrote the comedy and had to sort of be a hidden writer. So there's so much hidden talent that had to be extinguished, and that I think would be great to bring back. And of course, it would be sad too. But as a good old Viennese, for me, the sadness is always, somewhere. But I think film is a medium that can sort of deal with it.
I agree with you. I agree with you. It's been wonderful chatting with you this evening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Eileen. Thank you. Have a great evening.
You as well, and everybody else here. Thank you. Join us next weekend for our 3rd week of the film festival, when we're going to be showing 3 films and talking to the filmmakers. And Bernadette, have a wonderful evening. Good night.